Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, The Art of Zionism, Ideology, Art, and the Building of the Nation, sponsored by the UCLA YNS Nazarian Center for Israel Studies in partnership with Na'amat USA. I'm Maura Resnick, the Executive Director of the Nazarian Center, and I'm pleased to be co-hosting this event with Deanna Migdal, the National Executive Director of Na'amat USA. Deanna?
Thank you, Maura. Na'amat USA is delighted to partner with the Nazarian Center for this event today. In fact, we've been talking about collaborating on a joint venture with Dr. Dorchin even before the pandemic, while he was at UCLA and before he went back to Israel. And so today we have finally succeeded in what is hopefully the first of many co-ventures. As the Nazarian Center is the intellectually vibrant home for Israel studies at UCLA, Na'amat USA is part of a large international Zionist women's movement with thousands of intellectually vibrant and socially aware women active in the organization. Our mission is to empower women and help improve the lives of women and families in Israel through education and social services. We welcome members and friends of Na'amat who have joined us today and also extend a warm welcome to friends of the Nazarian Center. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to Zoom with us today to hear Dr. Dorchin. Back to you, Maura.
Thank you, Deanna. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Uri Dorchin, our speaker. Dr. Dorchin is a cultural anthropologist whose research and teaching focus on the socio-cultural aspects of popular culture and music, ethnicity, and racial thinking. He's the author of Israeli Hip Hop in Israel, and co-editor of the forthcoming volume, Blackness in Israel, Rethinking Racial Boundaries. He currently teaches in the program on Jewish Studies at the University of Colorado Boulder, and the Nazarian Center was fortunate to host him for 2 years as a visiting assistant professor, teaching multiple courses on the history, society, and culture of modern Israel. We're so glad that he could join us today from his home at Kibbutz Kfar HaChoresh in northern Israel. After Uri's talk, there'll be time for Q&A, so we invite and encourage you to type in your questions in the Q&A function on Zoom at the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, let me thank Uri and turn it over to him.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deanna. Thank you, Maura, for these kind words and for the opportunity you gave me to talk to your audience. As you've mentioned, we were trying to create this event for some time now, and we experienced several predicaments, and I'm really glad that eventually we have this opportunity, and thank you for making it happen. So thank you all for joining us this morning, which is actually an evening here in Israel. And as Maura introduced, the theme and subject of today's lecture is the art of Zionism, ideology, art, and the building of the nation. And let us get right into it. And I'll begin by saying that the Zionist idea sparked the imagination of Jewish artists whose work captured the social atmosphere in Europe of the late 19th century and illustrated the values and ideology of the Zionist movement by means of color, sound, text, and form. In this lecture, I will introduce and examine but a small sample of works that nevertheless represent some of the most prominent names among Zionist artists. The works that we will soon see and talk about cover roughly the period that spanned between the 1890s to the 1940s. That is, in other words, the time of the formation of the Zionist movement and very close to the point in time of the establishment of Israel, the Jewish state. Now, beyond the artistic qualities itself, I will claim that in translating abstract ideas into artistic forms, these works help to make sense of the revolutionary idea of a future Jewish state and thus practically assisted in realizing it. So this is not only this illustration is not only the flyer for the lecture of today, it also actually originated as a flyer that promoted the 5th Zionist Congress that took part in Basel, Switzerland in 1903. It was illustrated by an artist called Ephraim Moses Lilien. In a way, the whole Zionist vision is captured in this picture, and every little detail in it has a symbolic meaning. Let's just pay attention very shortly to a few of these symbols. And let's begin with a verse that we can see down there. May our eyes behold your return to Zion in mercy, which is recited by any observant Jew several times a day, but in the context of the Zionist movement, it was to be taken here very literally. The angel points to the right direction, eastward, to the rising sun that symbolizes not merely the morning of a new day, but actually the dawn of a new era in the Jewish history. Now, beyond this spatial dimension, the angel pointing sets the background for the dichotomy between West and East, which is equivalent to the opposition between yesterday and tomorrow, and between life in the European diaspora and the coveted life in Israel. Diasporic Judaism is represented here by an old man. You can see him on the left-hand side. His appearance betrays his traditional lifestyle. You can see the kippah, you can see his beard, his side locks. He sits, he bows down, leaning on his walking cane, and his whole body represents weakness. On the opposite side, that, if put on a map, would be the eastern side, we see a different kind of a Jew in the guise of the plower, the plowman. That is a man who is younger, vigorous, and productive. In accordance, the domain of the nature is also represented by two opposites. Next to the old man, we see a thorny bush that apparently may bear nothing but pain, while on the other side, a flourishing stalks of wheat. This symbol of the wheat reminds us of the verse of the blessing, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, he who brings forth bread from the earth, is turned here, like the caption that appears in the bottom, it turns from a mere blessing into a binding commandment. Now, to be able to fully evaluate this flyer, we must put it in a context. By the turn of the century, there was in fact very little going on in Palestine, well, at least as far as Zionism is concerned. The Zionist idea at that time was exactly that, an idea or a bunch of ideas, discussions, philosophies. In that respect, Ephraim Moses Lilien picture did not reflect what was already happening out there in Palestine, but rather represented a possible utopian future. Being clear and simple, it thus converted big words, complicated ideas, and contested ideologies into a generalizing figurative images that anyone could easily comprehend. Zionism was part of the general turn toward nationalism that took over in Europe at that time, at the turn of the century. The Zionist painters were educated on the tradition of realist painting that is associated with that era. Paintings by names like Caspar David Friedrich or Isaac Levitan that you can see on your screen now are considered national-oriented and say to convey national sentiments. The question is why? Why is that? Because apparently what we see is nothing but an empty land. But this is not just a land, okay, but rather the land. And its emptiness is actually a hint to its potential to become a motherland to the nation that belongs in it and to which the land itself is belonged. What we see here is the beginning of life, the life of a nation, and a land that is on the verge of becoming a mother. Indeed, one of the main principles of nationalism is the perceived kinship relations or bloodline that connects the land to the nation. It is therefore no surprise that when people are eventually appears, and again, these are not just people, but the people, as we can see them in Andres Zorn's painting on the right-hand side, they are standing on their land naked. And if they remind you of a different couple created naked, you are definitely right. This is the myth of creation of the ethnic nation state that served as a model to the Zionist movement. Jewish European painters like Reuven Rubin or Nahum Gutman implemented these ideas and this style and represented them in a similar fashion. It is here you may say, when you look at Nahum Gutman and Rubin's painting, you may say the land is not empty. It is correct, although Zionist authors and poets never hesitated to speak of pre-Zionist Israel in terms of a wilderness, an abandoned and deserted land. Nevertheless, they also emphasized the foundations that were already been laid down in antiquity. These foundations put by the nation's ancestors served as their kushan, a title deed. It is the basis for claims of birthright by Jews, as we can see it in the banner of the JNF, the Jewish National Fund from 1940. A nation is reborn on its ancestral soil. So if this banner was created by Otto Wallisch in 1940, who made a lot of illustration for the Jewish National Fund and other Jewish organizations since the 40s and as far and as late as the 70s. So if European nations were born, then Israel was reborn. One of the most powerful inspirations for Zionist thinkers was Friedrich Nietzsche's modernist philosophy. Nietzsche's ideas about the changing of values or the transvaluation of values, as he put it, and his notion of the Übermensch, the modern man who sets himself free of the shackles of tradition and rejects history, and rejects hoary social conventions, gave conceptual framing to the Zionist aspirations. Take a look at these three prominent thinkers of Zionism and take a minute to read what they have written. These three authors exemplify very explicitly the Nietzschean influence. And as you can see, they were all writing very soon after Nietzsche published his extremely influential essays like The Gay Science and Thus Spoke Zarathustra, some 10 years earlier. At least in the case of Yaakov Cohen, that you can see up there, we can see the double bind of the past and the future. It is only by reconnecting to our ancient past that we will be able to move into the future as a modern nation. Another influential idea by Nietzsche is his famous declaration about the death of God. In rejecting tradition and envisioning a new Jewish subject, one that will feature mental and physical strength, as Reuben Brenin put it, many looked for a new godly model. One example is poet and educator Shaul Czechovsky, who wrote in 1899 the poem El Mul Pesel Apollo, facing the statue of Apollo. Let's read this together. The Jewish people grew old, their God grew old with it. I came on to you, our forgotten God, the God of past times. I will bow for life, for heroism and beauty. I will bow to all the beauties that have been robbed by human corpses and rotten human seed from the hands of the Almighty, the God who conquered Canaan in a storm, who was chained by tefillin leash. Well, reading these lyrics render the impression that it is not so much that Czernychowski wished for the death of God as he hoped to give him another chance. In embracing the Apollonian model and thus passing over the second commandment, thou shalt not have other God before me, the poet tries to remind us of the furious patriarch of all times. What happened to this mighty God of the fathers? Exactly what happened to the people themselves. He lost track and lost his potency during 2,000 years of life in the diaspora, disconnected from the source of power, which is the homeland of Canaan, of the Holy Land. Pay attention to how he describes the European Jews of his time, human corpses and rotten human seed. This caustic depiction refers us back to Lillian representations of the old Jew in the picture that we began with. It is they, those human corpses, who robbed all the beauties and chained God with their tefillin leash. In that respect, Czernychowski do follow Nietzsche's metaphor. His poems seem to suggest that one must kill God in order to revive God's sense of divinity. Here's another example that goes along that line. This is the famous statue of Nimrod, made by sculptor Yitzhak Danziger in 1939. Made of local Nubian sand rock, the statue commemorates the mythical hunter who sought to control the power of nature and who, at the height of his power, dared to challenge God himself. For Danziger, Nimrod symbolized what Apollo symbolized for Czernychowski, namely ambition, discipline, self-reliance, and bravery. In terms of materiality, because we're talking about a statue, a sculpture here, and not a poem, so in terms of materiality, choosing the local sand rock, a very non-European choice, hints to the aspect of indigenousness. It follows the national logic according to which people of the nation are made of the same substance of the soil of their homeland. It is here that we come back to the bloodline connecting the people to the land. In Hebrew, this connection is demonstrated semantically in the connection. Take a look down here. In the semantic connection between the terms dam, Adam, and Adama, blood, man, and land. This metaphor repeats itself in numerous ways and artistic formats. I want to show you now one poem written by prominent poet Avraham Shlonsky in 1938, in which the practice of working in the field is a metaphor for making love with the land. Before I turn the slide, it should be noted that it is not a unique example in any way. As I said, there are numerous examples that feature the same metaphor. The reason I chose this specific poem is the sheer explicitness in which it is put. So here's the slide, and take a minute to read it. So before we turn to speak a little about the contents of this poem, let's see at its title, because in a way the title encapsulates all that is being elaborated in the poem itself. Harei At. Harei At, of course, is the beginning of the blessing that the groom says to his bride under the chuppah in the ceremony of the wedding. Harei At mikudeshet li. With this ring, you are consecrated to me. Okay, so the farmer takes upon himself the covenant of marriage with the land by cultivating it. From here, it goes into an erotic depiction, almost pornographic, I would say, of likeness between the land and the bride. The few of you who are familiar with my research, and as Mora noted earlier, I'm following for many years now the culture of hip hop and rap music in Israel and beyond. It is very common for rap albums. If you take an album, you usually see a sticker with a parental advisory warning about explicit lyrics contained in this music. Given this, what we see here, maybe it would be appropriate to put a similar parental advisory on the book of poems by Shlonsky. The Zionist idea, so I want to move now to refer to the content. Shlonsky is known as an acrobat of lyrics and rhymes, and many times he comes up with words that cannot be found in the dictionary, but nevertheless emphasizes the message he aims to convey. Take, for example, the word ships. Now, I know that ship is the plural form for sheep, but in the Hebrew version, the original word is tzon, which refer to the plural of herds of sheep or goats. But here, Shlonsky turned the tzon into tzonim, so he pluralized the plural form. Okay, so it is a plural of plural. By doing this, he aims to emphasize the motive of fertility, of abundance, of the flourishing. And there are several examples like this. It makes the translation of his poetry very difficult, I guess, even to a professional translator, let alone for someone like myself. As to the erotic motif, when Shlonsky speaks of deflowering the field, he uses the word Baal, the root Baal. Now in Hebrew, as some of you may know, the word Baal means husband, but the same root is also used to mean ownership, Baal Bait, the one who owns a house, for example. And it also denotes the act of penetration in the sexual context. So in this single word, when he uses the word Baal, he reminds that in traditional Judaism, the husband claimed ownership over his bride by the act of intercourse, just as the farmer makes his land his by plowing it. Unlike the biblical myth of creation, where God is the one that makes something out of nothing, a myth that was later, of course, extended and featured in the birth of Christianity with a virgin that miraculously became pregnant. Here it is on man to make a virgin ground become a motherland. Once again, the masculine potency of Zionism is opposed to the perceived rotten human seed of diasporic Judaism. So I want to move now from poetry to songs. Songs add an important dimension that is missing in poetry and other form of arts, as it invites the audience to join in the singing. Sing-along have become a common practice in Israel since the early age of Zionism. As such, people could implement the message of national collectivism featured by many songs by a first-hand experience of participating in the congregation of singers. And I intentionally chose to refer to the ritual of sing-along in terms of congregation, because as many scholars have noted, this apparently secular ritual have acquired religious-like quality, like many other arts that we already have seen acquired this kind of religious quality. Well, not traditional kind of religious, but it's something that is in a way sacred. Obviously and definitely sacred to those who consumed, those who created, those who produced, and also those who consumed these forms of art. As an example, let's take a song by Nathan Alterman, perhaps the rightful national poet. Now I know that the national poet is a title that is attributed to Chaim Nachman Bialik, but at least in my opinion, Nathan Alterman deserves it more. The song I'm talking about is called Shilbokken, Morning Song. It was written in 1935 and composed by Daniel Sambursky, regarded as an Israeli classic. Daniel Sambursky, who also composed many other Israeli classics like Shir HaEmek, Ba Menucha Layagea, also to the lyrics of Nathan Alterman. The morning, again, a repeated motif in Israeli arts and poetry, is already seen in the picture that, in the slide that that we opened, the flyer of Moses Lilien, again, is the dawn of a new age. The song begins with a flowery depiction of the local landscape. On the mountains, the sun is rising, and at the valley, dewdrop still shines. And then immediately states the commitment of the laboring people to their land. We love you, O our motherland, with joy, song, and labor. This pattern that we can see in the first verse repeats itself in the following verses. So if we take the second verse, for example, the second verse offers a more elaborated reference to the geography of Israel. From the slopes of the Lebanon until the Dead Sea, we will cross you with our plows. And by elaborating this geography, it also in a way sketches the borders of the Jewish homeland. Then, once again, in the second part of the second verse, it goes back and turns to repeat the statement of commitment. We will plant and build for you. We will beautify you. We will beautify you very much. Let's jump to the last verse. The last verse reads, and if the way is hard, if more than one will fall dead, we will forever love you, O our motherland. We are yours in labor and in arms. So this closing line, we are yours in labor and in arms, refers back and complements the lines that ends the first verse. We are yours with joy, song, and labor. Laboring, fighting, and singing, as we learn, are intertwined. When people cultivate their land, they ought to defend it, while always commemorating both the labor and defense by means of glorifying songs. It is not a coincidence that songs of labor, songs of battle, and songs of bereavement are three of the most prominent themes in the Zionist songbook. Let's listen to a part of this song.
השמש מלהבת, ובעמק עוד נוצץ הקהל, אוהבים אותך מולדת, בשמחה בשיר ובעמל, ממורדות הלבנון עד ים המלח, נעבור אותך במחרשות, אנו עוד ניגרח ונמלח, סלמת בטון ומלט ונפרוס לך מרבדי גנים על אדמת שדותייך הנגאלת הדגן ירנין פעמונים המדבר לנו דרך בו נחצובה הביצות אנחנו נייבשן מה ניתן לך עוד להוד בסובה
Okay, so this was the part of morning song. A word must be said about the musical style. Daniel Sambursky, the composer, an accomplished musician with his musical education in a German conservatorium, composed Altermann's poem as a march song. And like any other march, it aimed to deliver a sense of motion, but more important, to coordinate the motion of many people, to make them move as a unit. I vividly remember myself singing this song as at the age of 7, 8, as in elementary school, with my classmates, either in the class or during field trips, and singing these lyrics with the accompanied invigorating composition have a very powerful impact. It makes one feel the message, and I emphasize, not necessarily understand on a cognitive way, but feel it in a very physical way. Even if, as a young kid, one do not understand the full meaning of each and every word, still the sense of the we, the overall tendency toward action, and the statement of devotion to the land is clearly delivered. We should also remember that many of the Olim, the immigrants, the newcomers who arrived at Israel during that time of the 30s and later on after the establishment of the state, did not have proper Hebrew, if they have any Hebrew at all, let alone the capacity to understand the genuine poetic language of poets like Alterman, Shlonsky, or Czechovsky. Many of them joined in the singing without fully understand the meaning of the lyrics, but the very act of singing allowed them to experience the message embedded in it. This is not very different from a person who does not speak Hebrew, but still recite Hebrew prayers. Okay, when you recite Hebrew words that you do not necessarily understand, still the very act of the recitation make one feel what the prayer meant to convey. So in that respect, it wouldn't be accurate to say that people do not understand. They do understand, but on a higher dimension or on a higher level, which is not cognitive, but emotional. And indeed, what we can say in short is that the ritual of sing-along of this kind of song can be depicted as an emotional indoctrination. As we approach the end of this lecture, you may have asked yourself, what have remained of the Zionist ethos after 100 years? Obviously, the raw passion of a formative era can never be fully revived. In contemporary Israel, there are many contested ideas and ideologies. Some of them even criticize the Zionist heritage as we examined it so far. Yet the main principles of Jewish nationalism are still strongly rooted in the local culture. It is therefore not uncommon to see artistic expressions which are up to date in terms of style, but still emphasize the features and characteristic and properties we talked about here. Let me take one last example. This example is a very popular kids song, a song that you can hear being sang in any kindergarten in Israel these days. And as I learned from my American students, it also became somewhat popular in Jewish summer camps in America. The song is called Eretz Yisrael Sheli, my Eretz Yisrael, my land of Israel. So it begins like that, saying, my Eretz Yisrael, my land of Israel is nice and flowering. Who built it and who planted? All of us together. I built a house in Eretz Yisrael. So now we got a land and we got a house in Eretz Yisrael. From this point on, the verses will follow the same template, only that in each new verse there will be something more added to the land of Israel. So take a look here. So if the first verse, I built a house in Eretz Yisrael, so now we got a land and we got a house. The second verse on the right-hand side goes, my Eretz Yisrael Sheli is nice and flowering. Who built it and who planted? All of us together. I planted a tree in Eretz Yisrael. So now we got a land and we got a house and we got a tree in Eretz Israel. Let's listen to part of this song.
ילדות ישראלית.
1 second before, take a look at this slide that opens this video. What you can see here, I guess all of you can tell, this is the map of Israel. What do you see on this map? Nothing. This is an empty map. The land is empty, which throws us all the way back to the national-oriented arts that we saw from European painters in the 19th century. This is the empty land at the moment before, one moment before it bear new life on it.
ארץ ישראל שלי יפה וגם פורחת, מי בנה ומי נטע כולנו ביחד. אני בניתי בית בארץ ישראל, אז יש לנו ארץ ויש לנו בית בארץ ישראל. ארץ ישראל שלי יפה וגם פורחת, מי בנה ומי נטע כולנו ביחד. אני נטעתי עץ בארץ ישראל, אז יש לנו ארץ ויש לנו בית ויש לנו עץ בארץ ישראל. ארץ ישראל שלי יפה וגם פורחת, מי בנה ומי נטע כולנו ביחד. אני סללתי כביש בארץ ישראל, אז יש לנו ארץ ויש לנו בית ויש לנו עץ ויש לנו כביש בארץ ישראל.
So, sorry, I wanted to stop it on the previous slide, so we can see the house and we see the trees and we already have a road, and soon we will also have a bridge. So the kids are building their land verse by verse. How? Together. Who built it and who planted? All of us together. Of course, in Israel, it must be together. So after we have the house and the trees and the roads and the bridges, only one thing is still missing. I wish I could sit in front of you and ask you, what do you think is still missing? When I put forward this question to my students in class, I asked them to take a guess what is still missing. Some of them, almost always, want to say a television or a laptop, or in a more serious manner, suggest a factory or maybe a government. So all these are very good options, but there is something that is more important, or if not more important, more basic. And take a look, this is it. This is the last verse. I composed a song in Eretz Israel. So now we got a land, and we got a house and a tree, and a road and a bridge, and we have a song about the land of Israel. Why is it so important? Why is it so important to have a song on the land of Israel? It is important because if you wouldn't have a song that we may sing together, or some other artistic means we may share, the national project would remain a thing of the past. If you do have songs to sing with a group of 4-year-old kids in the kindergarten, or 8-year-old kids in elementary school, or 18-year-old soldiers in an infantry brigade, then you keep your past alive, or more properly, we are actualizing our past. By artistic means, the nation turns its past into a present. In the case we just saw, this cute kid song, the kids build their country anew every single day. It is only if we are able to retain the emotional education of the people, and mainly the younger generations, that we can still make sense of the imagined community called the nation, which brings me back to my leading claim, that art is never but a secondary outcome of an allegedly more significant social or political endeavors. On the contrary, art paves the way for ideas that otherwise would seem too demanding and sometimes even totally unreasonable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uri. Thank you for that wonderful and insightful talk. And now, if you have questions, please continue to type them into the chat. I want to start with a little question clarification about the last song. When was that written, and is it still sung today? Is the video a contemporary video or a very old little video?
So the answer is this song was written and composed by Datia Ben-Dor, one of the most, most prominent poets that I don't know if she would be regarded a poet, but I think she is a song. Let's talk of her as a songwriter who writes many songs for kids. It was written in the 80s, and it is very, very popular today. And as I said, I was very surprised to learn that also in America. And the video, I guess, is something that was created just recently in the last few years.
Uh-huh. Okay, thanks. And I have a question, or really a comment on my own experience as a kid in Jewish summer camp in the United States. So we learned songs like Ufaratzta, Yama Vekedma Tzafona Venigva, without knowing what we were singing about at all, or vaguely, but we all joined in a rousing chorus of these and other kinds of Zionist songs. So I could totally relate to what you said about that. So we had a few questions. One about the poem Harei At, the Czechovsky poem. The question was, is it similar to Shir HaShirim in any way, to this biblical Song of Songs? And
yes, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, it's a very, very nice question. It is indeed. I mean, obviously, I couldn't dive too deep and analyze the song as it deserved to be analyzed. But yes, Shlonsky definitely makes several references to biblical and to Shir HaShirim, in particular to Ezekiel. To when he said, if you could see, and you could see, but if you could read the Hebrew text, so it really took some few lines as is from Shir HaShirim, Et Dodim, Hallelujah, the time of love. Yes, it's definitely taken from there, and therefore this is one of the reasons that I was kind of hesitant to talk about this as a secular poem. I mean, in a way, it is secular, but at the other hand, it is strongly rooted in Jewish tradition.
Well, thank you for correcting me. I said Czechovsky, and it's a Shlonsky poem. We have a question. Are contemporary Israeli artists still interested in Zionist or nationalist themes, or is their art mostly personal today?
Israeli artists are attentive to this body of work. They are very attuned to the Israeli classics because they have no other way. I mean, this is the building blocks of Israeli arts, Israeli music, Israeli poetry, and anyone who makes arts in Israel, any kind of arts, must take a stand and reference toward it. Even if one decides to totally ignore it, this is also taking a position. It says something about it. So being the foundation of Israeli art, no one have the privilege of just go beyond it. And therefore, although many people seem to ignore it or try to take Israeli arts in totally different way, even more often than not, you can see people refer to it in complicated ways, sometimes in very hinted way on. But if you dig into it, you can see these references, just as you can see the references of the Zionist poet to European arts, to biblical texts, and so forth. It's always there. Sometimes disguised, sometimes more explicit, sometimes less explicit, but it's there. There is no other way.
Thank you. There was a question about the use of Yiddish, whether Yiddish was used in the pre-state period in poems or Zionist artwork of the period.
Yiddish itself as a language was not used. It was boycotted. I mean, it was inappropriate to write or to speak Yiddish. Take, for example, Chaim Nachman Bialik, who liked very much. I mean, he wrote his Hebrew poetry in the Yiddish accent. His poetry is to be read in a Yiddish accent. So Yiddish was there. Once again, as I said, you cannot escape this background. You cannot escape this cultural cradle. So the Yiddish was there. It was there in the accent. It was there in the accentuation, but it was not there as a language. Actually, there is a very famous story of there were troop of the Hebrew gatekeepers that were walking in Tel Aviv trying to detect those Jews who insisted speaking Yiddish, and they happened to find Bialik chat in Yiddish with a friend. He take indulgence in doing so when he was in private company. He really, I mean, this was his mother tongue, okay? And he was being told that as a national poet, it is not appropriate for him to talk Yiddish out there in the street. But this is, by the way, why I prefer to refer to Nathan Alterman as the real or as the rightful national poet, because his poetry redeemed the Hebrew from the Yiddish accent. It was the first. Well, he did not do it single-handedly, but he was the most prominent, of course, that make the real or the first Hebrew poetry.
Thank you. And another question about whether or how Israeli artists and poets depicted the Arab inhabitants of the land, or did they pretty much just completely ignore them?
They did not ignore them. I mean, the representation of the Palestinian and the Arab natives in the land went through several rounds or waves. At least in the early age, many Zionists, including the Zionist artists and the painters, looked at the Arab people, the Falahim, as they saw them as a missing link to our own historic era, to our antiquity. If we look at the Arab peasants, they said, it will give us a good sense of how we, the Jews, or at least our ancestors, looked 2,000 years ago. And Arabs were taken as an example for adjustment, perfect adjustment to the local land, something that the Zionists wanted very much to achieve, to once again become natives in their land, and to learn the practices, and to learn the labor, and to actually learn practically how to make bread out of this soil. Later on, as the Jewish-Arab conflict became more and more, it became more problematic and culminated, of course, in the 1948 war. Arabs ceased to become a model. And then we can see a new representation of the Arab as backward, as dangerous, as primitive, and so forth.
Mhm. There's a question about the role of the Bezalel school in creating an Israeli identity through art. And I know that the Bezalel was incredibly important. Maybe you can talk about that a bit.
Yes, the Bezalel School was the hub, the hotbed for the earliest Israeli paintings, and in that respect, it put the foundation for the establishment of Israeli arts, Israeli painting. Later on, during the 30s, the pendulum, or I'd say the weight, moved from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, and it gave a different kind of Israeli paintings. I would not be able to go too deep into it, but this is when people like Reuven Rubin and Gutman and Ziona Tajer, and by the way, this is the first time in the last hour that I mentioned a female artist, by the way, which is a very interesting point in itself. They moved to Tel Aviv, and Tel Aviv became the focus or the center for artistic production in Israel.
And kind of a combination of a few questions here about if today, if national religious politics is sort of leading to a resurgence of a Zionist art, a Zionist message, and at the same time, in songs like the Eretz Yisrael Sheli song, are there again these kind of Zionist values that are being instilled in children in school?
Yeah, so as I said, there are now contested ideologies as Israel. I mean, to put it very simply, in the early age, the direction or the orientation was to create a new root in Israel once again. So it was to create an anchor, to create to establish the connection with the land. These days, in an era that some call the post-national era, nations, and not only Israel, this is correct to many other nations, the orientation is being opposed. The gaze and the look and the orientation is outward. Now, once we have our homeland and we are owners of our homeland, we are free to go and explore other cultures, other spheres, other worlds. Well, we're living in the era of globalization. And this kind of contested ideology creates a polarizing conflict between those who try to hold back or to keep the windows and the gate closed as much as possible, and to revive the sentiments and the language and the ideology of old times. And this in itself creates a counter reaction by those who wish to go global and say, listen, this is anachronistic ideologies and we must go over it. And this dynamic creates counter politics in a way, and works to polarize the two positions.
So, question about when did Zionist art begin to appear? The question says every art movement has an origin and a starting point. So what would you consider the starting point of what you could call Zionist art?
So the Zionist art is the art that was made under the influence of modernist, nationalist, realist tradition of European painting. People look, Isaac Levitan, for example, that we saw was a Russian painter, a Jewish Russian painter, who nevertheless was never affiliated with Zionism, or at least in a very late part of his life. And he was defied by that, by people like Bialik, because he was not, he did not affiliated or gave expression to his Jewishness or Zionism in his painting. So Zionist paintings had its roots or beginning or origins in Europe, and then the Israeli Zionist beginning was, I would say, during the 20s, after the second and even more so after the third Aliyah to Israel in the 20s.
There was a question about the kibbutz, although maybe not exactly related, but do you see maybe the breakup of the traditional kibbutz or many traditional kibbutzim as somehow a change in Zionist values, or what aspect of Zionist values remain in the kibbutz movement? As a kibbutznik, maybe particularly, you have thoughts about that.
These days, at the kibbutz these days?
Yes.
Well, not so much actually. The kibbutz is not regarded as historically speaking, it is regarded as the flagship of the Zionist movement, of the Zionist enterprise, but not anymore. There are very few kibbutzim that still try to hold on and retain the communal way of life, but the kibbutz movement, or the kibbutz movements, generally speaking, is not there anymore. The kibbutz acts and perceived these days more like a conventional, I would say, suburb, and many people from urban neighborhoods are trying to get and buy a piece of property in a kibbutz just to realize the bourgeoisie dream of having a private house with a little backyard. So this is the kibbutz these days. And going back to the contested ideologies, many people today, and especially we can hear it from the Mizrahi spokesperson, are trying to represent or accuse the kibbutzniks of being people who try to hold on to the best pieces of land of Israel, to have their backyards for themselves and not sharing with the rest of the citizens of Israel. So yeah, what's going on these days in the kibbutz speak volumes about what was happening or what is still happening to the Zionist dream and the Zionist movement.
Thank you. We have one more question that just came in about whether Zionist arts were affected by Arabic culture. We talked a little bit about that in the earlier period, but also if the art was used to shape a message of coexistence and involvement with the Arab community.
Yeah, so both these options that you've mentioned are correct. Some, or even more than some, were influenced by the local arts and crafts of the region, and try to implement these motives into their arts. Some of them did it in the name of trying to create a counter or contested ideology to the Zionist mainstream that always remained exclusionary to the Arab population. Mm-hmm. But some of them did, like the Canaanites. We talked about Nimrod, for example, by Danziger. Danziger was part of the Canaanite movement, which was not really anti-Zionist, but it was trying to offer a different trajectory of Zionism that made way or made room for the Arab population. On the other hand, people of Hashomer, for example, a guarding organization that was formed by the first Aliyah in the late 19th century was trying to imitate and follow the way of the Arab people because, as I said, they believed that these are people to learn from, but still, as their very name suggests, Hashomer, the guard, was trying to make a fence and put a barrier between the Jewish settlements and the Arab population. So they look onto the Arab population and created a discourse with them, but not in order to create a common denominator or a coexistence with them, but rather to keep them out.
Okay, we have time for one very short final question before we close. Of the artists that you showed, were they largely Ashkenazim, and were there Mizrahi artists also that were part of what you would consider this Zionist art movement?
Almost exclusively Ashkenazim. Almost exclusively Ashkenazim, because the Ashkenazim were those who came from Europe, brought this ideology of modernism that was totally strange to the region of the Middle East. So most of them were Ashkenazim. Some of them were Israeli born, and of course they were these were taken by the second generation, those who were now called the Sabras, the sons and daughters of the pioneering. But they too, I guess, would be considered as Ashkenazim. It is interesting that the Israeli composer, the Ashkenazi composers, people like Sambursky, for example, and others who were educated in the European conservatoriums, many times preferred to work with Yemenite female singers. So the one who was at the front, the voice that have been heard and the image that was seen was Yemenite, because once again it represented something that is belonged to the region. Their look, their accent was denoted or represented something that is native to the land. But again, the style, the sound was totally European.
Okay. Well, thank you, Uri. Thank you so much for this really fascinating and insightful talk. It was wonderful to finally be able to do this. And I think Deanna is going to come back and join me. But we wanted to, again, thank Naamat for partnering with us and for all of you for joining us this afternoon. And this event has been recorded and will be available on the Nazarian Center's website on our multimedia page and also on our YouTube channel. So if you missed any part of it or share it with others, please, and join us for future events. Deanna?
Thank you again, Tamara, and the Nazarian Center for collaborating with Not My USA today. And a special thank you to Dr. Dorchin for sharing his expertise with us. That was really interesting. I loved it. Hope everyone else did as well. And as Maura mentioned, this lecture has been recorded, and I'll make sure everyone receives the file to review at any time to share with friends and family who couldn't join us today. And it'll be on our Not Ahmad USA YouTube channel as well. So everyone stay safe and be well.